This was a secret so deep. This wasn't something that people in a quiet town where everyone knew everybody's business would ever predict. Under obedience to a stern church deacon, Jacob fell in love with a quiet boy from the bookstore, Ethan. Their love was dangerous, hidden in the shadows in a place ruled by tradition. But when their secret was exposed, everything unraveled in one violent moment, one of them dead and the town changed by it all. What could make a father kill the boy that his son loves? Jacob and Ethan from two worlds were thrown into an intense and undeniable relationship. Jacob was 21, raised in the starched rule of his father Greg, a controlling deacon of their devout church. Living an obedient life in this conservative town of Elmswood, Jacob helped with the family farm, accompanied his family to church, and did as he was told. He was hiding some sort of secret that would have destroyed the world his father had built. Ethan, at 18, is quieter and a more thoughtful guy and new to Elmswood. With his part-time work at the local bookstore as a bookkeeper, Ethan passed. Here, though still an outsider to the town, the bookstore became some kind of solace against the judging stares of people who never fully accepted him. When Jacob and Ethan first met in that bookshop, it wasn't visible at first, but definitely powerful. Then it grew into a smile, secret encounters in the woods, and stolen kisses behind closed doors. The town of Elmswood was one in which being different wasn't only unacceptable, but dangerous, and both knew they had to keep their relationship under lock and key. Yet with each meeting, their love grew stronger, and so did the fear of discovery. As his truancies at home increased in number, Greg suspects him, and there's no alternative but the expected route: marry some good Christian girl and continue the family legacy. However, Jacob can't stay away from Ethan because he gets in between his duty to his father and the love he has for the boy who makes him feel really alive. The danger of being caught loomed ever closer, and their love was growing intolerable to be kept hidden. The walls were closing in, and both knew that the truth wouldn't be concealed forever. Their love was forbidden in Elmswood. The town had conservative values and continued living in the good old ways as given by the church. Anything outside was met with hostility. The love between Jacob and Ethan wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. A place like Elmswood made being different more than just standing out. It was something that brought danger to survival. The price paid to escape that may indeed result in losing everything: family, reputation, even life. They knew what dangers this entailed, but still were unable to hold it back. Their bond was something that had overwhelmed them both, and as strongly as they could fight it, it kept getting stronger with time. They'd met each other in secret. They'd slip out of the house into quiet spots where they thought nobody would ever find them, by the train tracks or behind the bookstore where Ethan worked. Probably these moments were one of the only ways of being away from the town's eyes, and even within that brief freedom time, horror was lurking, because every noise, every distant sound could denote a discovery. Worst of what might have happened if discovered was something that accompanied them everywhere. Things didn't help, of course, with Greg, Jacob's father, always lurking around and always watching for something. The more Jacob could wriggle away with Ethan, the more Greg seemed to notice. It was just too much pressure. Jacob was well aware that if his father found out, the consequences would be too much to bear. Greg wasn't the forgiving type, and his anger was one thing Jacob lived more in terror of than anything else. Greg couldn't ignore the changes in Jacob any longer. His once obedient son was becoming distant, missing church and avoiding family meals. Greg had always expected Jacob to follow the path laid out for him: marry a good Christian girl, take over the family farm, and uphold the family's values. But lately, Jacob seemed uninterested and distracted, and Greg took it as a personal betrayal. He soon began to suspect that Ethan, the quiet boy from the Parker family, was the problem. Greg had never trusted Ethan or his family, who didn't fit into Elmswood's conservative mold. The more time Jacob spent with Ethan, the more Greg's disapproval turned into suspicion and anger. Convinced that Ethan was leading Jacob astray, Greg began to pressure his son into courting Rachel, a girl from church. But every time Greg brought it up, Jacob withdrew further, his silence only deepening the tension at home. Jacob and Ethan knew they couldn't stay there in Elmswood. The whispering judgments against them and the space kept getting smaller around Jacob's father, Greg, really burdened them. For both of them, leaving wasn't only a move to escape judgment, it was a survival mechanism. They planned to catch the last train into the city where they could have a life that would be lived openly without suffocation of tradition or Greg's tightening grip. The days before that would be the ones they took to escape. Their days were all taut and tense. Jacob could feel his father's distrust growing one day at a time. His absences and stolen moments with Ethan were not going unnoticed. Pressure mounted, and Jacob knew that it was only a matter of time before Greg confronted him. There was no other way out but through running. On the night of their escape, Jacob packed a small bag and crept down the stairs with his heart pounding. Meeting Ethan by the train tracks, they waited in the darkness, the sound of the approaching train signaling their chance at freedom. But fear lingered. What if Greg found them before they could leave? As the train neared, their hearts raced, knowing that everything could still come crashing down. As the train approached, Jacob and Ethan felt both fear and hope, thinking they were on the brink of freedom. But everything shattered when Greg's voice cut through the night. He emerged from the shadows, gun in hand, his face twisted in fury. Jacob's worst fear had become reality. His father had found them. Greg's rage had been simmering for months, and it exploded at that moment. The betrayal he felt was overwhelming. His son, raised to follow strict religious values, had defied him in the worst possible way. To Greg, Jacob's love for Ethan wasn't just wrong, it was an abomination. It was a direct assault on the family's name, on everything Greg had worked for.
Do you think you can just walk away?
Greg's voice shook with fury.
You think you can defy me and run off with him?
His words dripped with venom. The gun was pointed at Ethan, but Greg's anger was equally aimed at Jacob. In a fit of rage, Greg pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. Ethan collapsed, blood staining his shirt as Jacob desperately tried to save him. But it was too late. Ethan's final breath slipped away as he whispered, "I love you." Ethan died in Jacob's arms, his body growing cold as the weight of what had just happened sank in. Jacob was left kneeling in the dirt, covered in Ethan's blood, the love of his life ripped away from him in an instant. The sound of the approaching train faded into the background, irrelevant compared to the silence that followed Ethan's last breath. It was over. Everything they had dreamed of, every moment they had shared, shattered by a single bullet. And as Jacob held Ethan, sobbing, Greg stood there frozen, the gun still in his hand, as if he couldn't comprehend what he had just done. The news of the shooting spread through Elmswood like wildfire. In a town where secrets rarely stayed hidden, the tragedy struck like a lightning bolt, leaving everyone stunned. Some, quietly whispering behind closed doors, believed Greg had done the right thing, and that he had protected his son from what they saw as a sinful life. Others were horrified, unable to fathom how a father could kill someone his son loved. The town, once tightly bound by tradition, was suddenly divided by a murder that exposed the dark undercurrent of hatred and fear that ran through it. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.